I'm Levi Pate, and I'm going to be talking about King Christian X. Who was King Christian X? He was the King of Denmark from 1912 to 1947. He rose to prominence during the Easter Crisis in 1920, when, during a dispute over the frontier between Denmark and Germany in the aftermath of World War I, King Christian solidified himself as a unifying symbol when he rode his horse through the disputed territory. What I would like to focus on is King Christian and Denmark under German occupation during the Second World War. The Germans tried to maintain a friendly relationship with the Danish. They saw them as being their racial brothers and as close to Aryan as you could get. So they wanted to form a camaraderie with them. They also wanted to set Denmark as an example of just how good it is under German occupation, under German rule, to set them as a model state. German Commissar Best was in charge of the occupation and was given the mission of enforcing German policy. Eventually, he got in trouble for not pushing their policy in regards to the Jews, and he was ordered by Hitler to enact the German Jewish policy by rounding up the Danish Jews and shipping them to concentration camps. When Best set about to complete this, he recruited a local by the name of George F. Duckwitz. He hired Duckwitz because he was an expert in the local waterways. Because Denmark is made up of many islands, they best recognized that they would need a local expert in order to transport all of the Jews back to Germany. However, Duckwitz was horrified when he realized what Best's intention was. However, he kept this concern to himself, and after his meeting with Best, went to the Danish resistance and told them what was going to happen, and the Danish resistance set about rescuing the Jewish population. During the war, Denmark did more than any other country in rescuing its Jewish population while under German occupation. Now I'd like to look at a few myths surrounding Christian X and the German occupation. First of all, there is the Star of David myth. There are three versions of it. One version is that a German officer told Christian X that they would be implementing the policy in which all Jews would be required to wear the Star of David. And King Christian responded by saying that if they did, he would wear it. Another version was that he did wear it when the Germans tried to implement the policy. And the last version is that the Danish people followed the example of their king and they all wore the Star of David when the Germans tried to implement the policy. However, as far as we know, the Germans never did try to implement the policy because they recognized that the Danish people would not put up with it, because the Danish people had a reputation for not tolerating anti-Semitism. There was another myth, the Jewish problem myth. In this myth, there was a conversation between Christian X and a German officer. There are two different versions. One version is that when the German officer asked King Christian about the Jewish problem, that Christian responded, "There is no Jewish problem here. There are only my people." And the other version is that Christian X responded by saying, "We have no Jewish problem here because we have never considered ourselves inferior," implying that the Germans only had a Jewish problem was because they saw themselves as inferior to the Jews. There was another myth as well. The story went that a German officer demanded that they put up the Nazi flag in the palace. King Christian responded by saying, "If you do, a Danish soldier will take it down." The German officer responded, "That soldier will be shot." King Christian responded, "That soldier will be me." So let's look at the facts, the man and the symbol. Christian X had long maintained a good relationship with the Jewish community of Denmark. In 1933, King Christian was invited to the centenary service at the synagogue in Copenhagen. However, at the same time, Hitler had instituted the ban on Jewish goods in Germany. The Jewish community leaders in Denmark approached Christian and said they would understand if he could not attend. But Christian responded saying that, "Of course, now is the time that I will attend." There was also his hobby of horse riding that he had become famous for in the Easter crisis of 1920. He would continue that hobby in the interwar period and during the occupation itself. These horse rides would take on a deep meaning to the Danish people during the occupation, as it would remind them of the time before the war, and that their king was still with them, and that things would be all right, that they were all still in this together. There was also small actions he would take during his horse rides. He would greet warmly fellow Danes, shaking their hands. However, with the German soldiers, he would give them the cold shoulder and ignore them anytime they saluted him. And the Danish people would pick up on this, and they too would give the German occupiers the cold shoulder and would ignore different events or parades or concerts the German occupiers would hold. And this would insult the Germans considerably because they saw the Danes as basically fellow Aryans, and they were trying to maintain a good relationship with them, and they couldn't understand this rudeness. There was also several letters King Christian would write that would show his character. During the occupation, the Jewish synagogue in Copenhagen was victim of an arson attack. The damage would be light, but King Christian would write a letter to the Danish leaders in which he would say he regretted to hear about the attack, but he was relieved to know that no major damage was done. Again, this was during the German occupation, and King Christian was maintaining an open relation with the Jewish community. Then, when the Germans began instituting their policy in regards to the Jews in Denmark, as soon as King Christian found out, he wrote a letter to the German ambassador in which he would say that any action taken against a Danish community, a Danish group, who had maintained good standing within Denmark for centuries, there would be terrible consequences. Then, when the Germans did institute their policy, there was a few Jews who were not able to get away, that the Danish underground was not able to rescue in time. It was a few hundred that were captured out of over 7,000. These Jewish prisoners were taken to a German concentration camp. However, the Danish leaders, the Danish government, would constantly barrage the Germans with questions about how their citizens were doing. The Danish would also send a delegation to check on their citizens. And during the visit, the Danish ambassador would pass a message along to the Jewish prisoners, telling them that their king sends his best regards. Now, this may not seem like much, but according to testimonies of the Jewish survivors, that this simple message carried a deep meaning to them, to know that their king had not forgotten them, that he still saw them as his citizens, and it did much to raise the morale. In recent times, information has come out that has caused historians to have to reassess their understanding of these myths of King Christian X. King Christian's diary was recently released by the Danish government. In it, there is a conversation that King Christian had with his prime minister, in which the prime minister asked him what they would do if the German government required them to institute the policy as regards to requiring all Jews to wear the Star of David. King Christian responded by saying to the effect that, well, in that case, we will all have to wear the Star of David. Word got out about this during the war and was published as a political cartoon, as you can see here, in a Swedish newspaper. Word quickly spread and the myth was born. Now, it had changed over time from a conversation with his prime minister to conversation with a German officer to the Germans actually trying to institute the policy. But this myth was based in fact. So in conclusion, what does Christian X represent as a symbol? Well, during the German occupation, he was a rallying point for the Danish people. The importance of just simple things like continue his horse rides, just doing simple gestures as being warm to his people, ignoring German soldiers, writing letters to Jewish community leaders, sending his regards to Jewish prisoners of war. Just these small actions took on a great meaning to the Danish people and the Danish Jews. This gave King Christian the undying love of his people and would create the undying myth of what King Christian represented to his people, because even if all these stories are not true, it represents what the Danish people wanted to believe their king would have done, that their king did. And the Danes acted upon these myths and on these simple actions that the king took. As I said before, no country under German occupation did more than Denmark did to save its Jewish population, as thousands were evacuated to neutral Sweden by the Danish underground. So the question becomes, what should we do with these myths? Should we completely dismiss them? Or is there an importance to them to represent the memory of King Christian, how his people wanted to remember him, what they believed he would do? Now here is my bibliography. During my research, I did run into a minor problem. There aren't any English sources exclusively on Christian X. So this research is fairly unique in its exclusive focus on Christian X. Thank you.